Guess who was on the phone with this whole time?
Monica, sorry.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Becoming an Ideal Candidate with Dr. Jamila Winter. A little background on our guest speaker. Dr. Winter was born and raised in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and moved to the United States as a teenager to go to high school. She can be described as a triple Ivy since she completed her undergraduate studies at Yale and went to medical school at Brown. She then did her internal medicine residency at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is associated with Harvard. She is currently doing her gastroenterology fellowship at Mount Sinai in New York. We are so happy to have you with us as you guide us through creating good applications and CVs. We are excited to hear all the tips and advice you have for us. To make this session as interactive as possible, please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or type it in the chat, or private message me if you're a little shy. If you sent in the questions through the sign-up form, these will be answered throughout our presentation and can be clarified at the end in our Q&A session. I'll now hand over to Dr. Winter, who will now proceed with her presentation. Dr. Winter, are you hearing us? You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. And you can see my slides?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Well, thank you, Atia. And I feel so honored that you asked me to come talk tonight. As Atia said, I'm one of the gastroenterology fellows at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. So I'll be talking about becoming the ideal medical candidate for residency and for job opportunities and internships. But if anyone is interested in GI or pursuing a career in internal medicine, please feel free to reach out. Please also, during this presentation, ask any questions that you have. It should be very interactive. You can also ask at the end of the presentation, and I think Atia will also provide you all with my contact information. So if you guys have any lingering questions that come up along the way, feel free to email me at any time. So we'll get started. So again, we'll be talking about becoming the ideal candidate. My presentation is going to be in 3 parts. I'm going to talk about how to become a well-rounded and successful applicant. I'm going to discuss how to prepare a CV. And then we'll talk about interviews. So I think most of you on the line, if not all of you, are medical students. And so at some point in your careers, you'll be applying for something, whether that be a medical residency, either abroad in the United States or locally in Jamaica, or you'll be applying to summer internship programs or research programs or jobs. And so this presentation will be applicable to all of you. And so we'll first start off about talking about the application process. So for those of you who'll be applying to residency in the United States, you'll be applying through the Electronic Residency Application Service, or ERAS. So this pertains to you in particular, but for others, this will also be very useful. And so most residency directors and also employers want a well-rounded applicant. And basically what that means is that they want someone who has interests within and outside of the clinical field, such as volunteering, extracurriculars, and work experiences. I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. They also want people who are committed to pushing the needle forward and contributing to the field of medicine through research. They also want someone who has strong clinical performances, and that includes good STEP scores, top GPA, top class rank, and a really good transcript. The application process also includes something called a personal statement, which we'll talk about. These need to be very memorable and usually sets applicants apart from each other. And then you'll need very strong letters of recommendations that speak to your character and your clinical acumen. We'll also discuss what it means to have a successful CV. With the ERAS application in particular, you will have to complete a CV. So we'll discuss that. And then it's really important for residents, the residency program, to not only see who you are on paper, but to see your personality shine in real life, and whether that be actually physically in person or virtually. So we'll talk about a few tips that I have on undergoing a successful interview. All right, so I think this is actually the most important thing about an application, whether that be to a residency or to a summer internship or a job. And that includes who you are and what drives you, both inside and outside the classroom. So it's really important while you embark on your medical school journey to hone in on your interests with extracurriculars and make sure you take part in work and volunteer experiences. Basically, you want to make sure you're involved in activities that tell a unique story about yourself. So for me in particular, I was interested and still am interested in medical education, mentorship, and health disparities research. And so I made sure I sought out opportunities that I was able to do in those respective fields. So for extracurriculars, basically this just means, what hobbies are you interested in? Are you involved in an athletic program? Are you in music? Do you write for a journal or a newspaper? Are you part of a sorority? Are you involved in any medical school sponsor activities, such as some school clubs? And one of the things that actually is particularly important is, are you a leader in any of these respective roles? It's not just enough to be involved, but to really be the organizer or the leader of these particular groups. So not only are you an athlete, but are you a captain, or are you the one really spearheading a charity event? Did you start a club or organization? Programs and employers really look into that because it can show that you'll be a leader in the medical field. And then also what's important is being active in the community. Essentially all residency programs really value service-oriented residents. And so this really could mean anything. This could mean volunteering at a free clinic. This could also mean volunteering in an elderly home for senior citizens. This could mean volunteering at a global health organization, or tutoring and mentoring after school, high school students or middle school students. And then obviously they want to make sure that you have had some exposure to the clinical setting. It's not enough to say, I've done my clinical rotations and that's it. They want to make sure you go beyond that. And again, that could mean working in a clinic or shadowing a physician in your area of interest. So it's really important that you hone in on these particular opportunities, because this is basically this is what will set you apart from other applicants. And then they also look at work experiences, and basically work experiences are paid positions. And this could really just mean recent or relevant jobs and internships, research opportunities, are you a scribe at a clinic or a hospital? Are you a coordinator at a public health program? Are you an emergency medical technician? Do you work for a pharmaceutical? Can you be a teaching assistant or a tutor? So these are all like paid positions that are looked on favorably as an applicant. And so I can get specific, just so you guys can know a little bit about me. The things that I did while I was in medical school that a lot of interviewers really appreciated. So I was involved with my medical school admissions committee, and I did a lot of teaching because I was very interested in med ed. So I taught a healthcare for the underserved curriculum for the first year medical students. I also volunteered at the free clinic, and I was a community outreach chair for one of the local chapters of the Student National Medical Association. I was also a part of a mentoring group where I mentored high school students who were interested in pursuing a career in medicine. So these are kind of just, some examples of things that I did and things that you guys can all do as well that will really look well on your application. And just quick tips, make sure you choose quality over quantity. They really care about longevity here. So make sure you are involved in these activities for many weeks, months, years, and they favor that than having like a laundry list of activities. Again, make sure that you are a leader in a few groups, and then be honest, don't over exaggerate your accomplishments or the activities that you're a part of. And just quickly, how do you look for volunteer activities? Really just look within your university, see what exists, ask your peers, your friends, family, mentors. It's as easy as going on to Google and looking at what organizations are nearby and what local charities exist. I quickly wanted to go over this and refer to this like little diagram here. So this is a part of the National Resident Matching Program, or NRMP. I recommend everyone taking a look at this before you apply to any residency programs. And basically it outlines all the match outcomes for all the applications that went through the match system. And this particularly looks at the IMGs, which I know you all are, and looking at like the respective demographics. And so for the kind of average number of work experiences for a US born IMG is about 4.3. So on average, you guys should be looking to do about 4 work experiences across the many years of your medical training. And then for non-US IMGs, it's about 6. The mean number of volunteering experiences is about 4.7, and for non-US, it's 4.1. So I would say anywhere from 4 to 6 activities really should be your benchmark if you want to be a competitive applicant. All right, research. So I know I had a lot of questions about research. It's like the bane of everyone's existence. It can be a struggle sometimes to get a good research opportunity. And so basically, because residency is like highly competitive, it's really important to have a research endeavor. It's really important for your success in gaining entry into residency. And the reason why it's important because it really shows your analytical skills and it strengthens your critical thinking. And research can really mean many things. It can mean bench research, it can mean clinical research, public health, community interventions. So it can take any shape or form, and basically just means that you are involved in some project that you're interested in. It could be a project that you've started, or it can be a project that's already ongoing that you're kind of hopping on and you're helping out with. I will say for residency, you don't necessarily need to be like the one who started that project, but it's really important to show that you are able and capable of doing some or helping with some project. So how do you find good research opportunities? The key is actually finding a mentor and finding a mentor early. So talking with your professors or emailing a professor or reaching out to an expert in your field of interest and literally just telling them, these are my interests. I want to get involved. Are there any projects that exist or or could you help me develop a project? And, you know, that's usually the first step. There are other ways that you can look for opportunities. I recommend that everyone use their summers to do an internship. You don't necessarily need to do an internship every summer, but these are really, you know, summers are a really good time to spend like several weeks developing a good research program or project. If you look at the AAMC website, there are actually a list of ongoing research opportunities that I think you all probably have, I think you have access to. Most of them are here in the United States, but it's just like applications that you can fill out. And, you know, it's an easy way to get some projects here in the US if you're considering residency here. I can actually try to show you just quickly the website. Let me see if this works. I'm not sure if you guys can see. Can you see this?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, good. So this is the AAMC website. Everyone should look at this website at some point. It has literally everything. It has how to apply to residency, attending medical school, and like all the recommendations that they have. If you look here, it says Clinical and Research Opportunities Database. If you click here, you can basically filter out what type of experiences you're interested in. So if you want to do like clinical and you want to do summer in the US, it basically kind of filters out the ones that exist. And you would just like, you know, this one's emergency medicine clinical experience. You can go to the program website and fill out this application. And so this is like a quick way to see what exists out there. So I just wanted to show you guys that. Atia will send out the link as well. Okay, so I'm gonna go back onto my PowerPoint. Okay, and then lastly, it's not enough just to do research, but you do have to publish something. You have to have some written work on some capacity, that whether that be an article, a poster, a PowerPoint presentation, a journal article, a case report. You have to have something documented to show that you have the skills to write up your research. It doesn't have to be a publication in like the top journal. It could be something as small as writing a little case report and submitting it to a mid-tier journal, or it could be as simple as doing a presentation at your respective medical school. So for me in particular, I was able to do a workshop, like it was a diversity workshop for my medical school at Brown, where I basically developed a workshop on implicit bias. I was also able to do 2 projects at the Brown University School of Public Health, working on childhood obesity and a fruit and veggie intervention in a poor community around the neighboring neighborhood. And then I also did a genetics basic science research at the National Institutes of Health in Maryland. So from all of that, I was able to publish like 2 papers from the NIH, 2 papers from Brown, and then I've done like several oral presentations throughout my medical school. And so nothing is too big or too small to do for this particular part of your application. And so the average number of research experiences for US-born IMGs is 2, and for non-US it's 2.5. And the mean number of abstracts, presentations, and publications, like all together, is 3.3 and 6.2 for non-US. And again, this is across all of your med school years. Just briefly on STEP scores, obviously it's important. It's not the end all be all. It's not the most important thing. Remember, your application is all about the full picture, right? And so this is just another aspect that will enhance your application. So as best as you can, start studying early. I started studying for step 1 as soon as med school actually started. I did like a few questions on a question bank. I recommend UWorld to everyone. Everyone should do UWorld. And I also read from a book called First Aid, but any of the books are okay. And I started that literally day 1 of medical school. It's not too late if you haven't started, but the sooner the better. I know that step 1 now is just pass fail, so even the more reason for you to do better on step 2. And if you look here, the average score for US IMGs is 234, and for non-US is 240. 240 is hard to get. So you need to start studying now, and you need to start studying daily. Other things that are important include class rank, GPA, and transcript. Okay, and just briefly, personal statements, including in the application. And this is just an essay of your personal strengths and experiences and accomplishments in the particular specialty that you're looking to apply into. It should be only a page long, no more than 6 paragraphs, and it should flow like this. The first paragraph should be an intro. It should grab the reader, it should frame your narrative, and basically you should be telling a life event or special patient encounter that you'll tie in at the end. And then the bulk of the personal statement should really be about your strengths that are unique, and you should include your research, your clinical work, your life experiences. And then at the end, basically what you'll be doing is tying in those experiences plus your personal life event, and discuss like why those led you to this particular specialty. So for me, you know, in medical school, I applied to internal medicine. And at that time, I was also interested in GI. And I had a special patient encounter with someone who I diagnosed colorectal cancer at an early stage, was able to prevent really, you know, advanced disease. I was able to do some shadowing experiences in GI. And fortunately, you know, I had interest in like disparities and was able to showcase to the residency program that I had the ability to do work in that field. And so with all those things, I tied it together on like, so because of this is why I wanted to go into GI. I've had all these experiences. I loved the field. I love internal medicine. And so it's really important to wrap it up. And then at the end, you want to talk about your career plan. So, you know, be very specific. I was like, I want to do internal medicine because X. It is a way for me to get into GI fellowship. And then at the end of it, you want to just provide a conclusion and say why you'd be a good candidate for their program. And it's important to start your personal statement early because you'll have many renditions. I had like 6 renditions on my personal statements. I had like multiple edits and had to move a lot of things around. So the earlier, the better. Be very specific. If you want to go into peds, don't say, I like kids. You want to say, you know, you want to paint a picture. When my younger sister was diagnosed with leukemia at age 12, I dreamt of ways I could change her life. And that's what led me to pediatrics. So you want to be very specific in your language, and then have people review and edit your statement. Letters of recs. So again, if you're applying to residency, at least in the United States, you will absolutely need at least 3 to 4 letters of recommendations. And it's usually one from your dean or chair or the head of your program. You'll probably need to get a recommendation from someone that you've worked with on a research project. And then you'll need 2 who are clinical mentors. So people that you've worked on your on your clinical rotations or your core clerkships. And one of the 2 need to be in your specialty. So for me, I had a recommendation from my dean. I had a recommendation from my the person that I did research with. And then I got 2 recommendations, one from actually a neurologist, but she knew me very well. And then one other person who was in internal medicine, GI. You want to make sure you ask people who know you very well. You don't want to get people who can just write you a recommendation. You want them to write you a strong recommendation. So be very honest with them and say, are you able to write me a strong letter? And then you want to ask them very early because it takes people like forever to write letters. They literally hate it. So it's important to get them on board pretty early on so it doesn't affect your chances of turning in your application on time. And then you want to make sure that you shine during your clinical core rotations because they actually take snippets from people that you rotate with, and they put it in your application as well. So things that people care about, they want you to make sure you have a good clinical knowledge, fund of knowledge, you're a team player, you're motivated, you're interested, you're enthusiastic, you're a great communicator, and you're a patient advocate. So these are all really important things to keep in mind. Okay, good. So Atia included the link in the chat. Thank you. All right, so before I move on to the second portion, talking about the CV, do you guys have any questions for me right now? Okay. All right, so we'll move on to the purpose of the CV. So the reason why the residency programs require a CV, because it's actually a very good brief summary of your background and accomplishments related to your academic and work experience. It's a dynamic document. It changes all the time because you add on new accomplishments, as you imagine, over the years, right? And so anytime you add on new publications or research or volunteering experiences, or when you move on to a different college or residency, you're constantly updating your CV. I try to update mine like every 6 months. When you read it, you should say to yourself, you know, if you're reading for the first time and without knowledge of yourself as an applicant, would the information be useful? Every single thing you put in your CV needs to serve a purpose. No one cares that you played soccer when you were 5 years old. No one cares that you volunteered at a soup kitchen once many, many years ago. Everything needs to be purposeful, and it needs to be useful, and it needs to tell a story, and it needs to showcase who you are as an applicant. So what is included in a CV? Basically, you need to include your contact information, and this is just basically where you can be reached, your education, your extracurricular and volunteer activities, which we discussed, your work experience, your research, your presentation in pubs, your honors and awards, and then if you're proficient in any other language, and your personal interests, which can be optional. So contact information is very simple, basically including your name, your mailing address, phone number, and professional email. Don't include anything unprofessional like, you know, bootylicious@hotmail.com. Like, it needs to be professional, first, last name at whatever server. Education. So just list all colleges and universities you've attended, including your medical school, graduate, and undergrad education. It should include your name, the name of the school and the location, and the major that you obtained. So for me, for example, I went to Yale. I got a Bachelor of Arts in anthropology, and I concentrated in medical anthropology. And then I went to Brown, where I got my medical degree, and I included the years. For your extracurricular and volunteer activities, you want to list the most important long-term activities and volunteer experiences, the ones that you're very passionate about, and the ones that you've had meaningful responsibilities and achievements from. And this can include anything that's student organization related, community service projects, committee work. And unfortunately, we don't really recommend using like high school activities unless it was extraordinary, like you started a clinic in wherever, or if it was related to healthcare. So just a few examples of things that I've included in my CV when I was applying to residency. I was on the community outreach. I was a community outreach chair on one of the medical associations of my school, where I organized like school-wide and local charity events, health fairs. And then I was on the admissions committee, where I served as a student representative and essentially selected students for interviews for entry into our medical school. You want to include work experience. Again, list all your paid internships, clinical or research experiences, include the name of the person you worked with, and add a brief description of your responsibilities, and most importantly, the competencies that you've gained through those experiences. And this should really be tailored towards medicine. Like, unfortunately, you know, I think a lot of us have done like a lot of non-medical work experiences, like working at a grocery store or being at, you know, childcare or like babysitting. That is not something you put on the CV. And for me, I was a teaching assistant at Yale, and I was a teaching assistant for 2 courses. And so I included that in my CV. And I said I helped organize and prepared class materials, evaluate final reports, and class performances. Research, this is like very important for the CV. So list all your major medically related research projects. It's okay to include ongoing projects. If it's not published, it doesn't matter, put it in your CV. Add a few sentences on describing each project and your role, and then include your research mentor's name and title. So when I was at the National Institutes of Health, I did a genetics project. The name of it is here. It was called ClinSeq. I included the location, my mentor, the year I did it, and then basically what I did was a lot of bench research, genetic stuff, things that I don't do anymore. And then you want to include any presentations or publications. Again, nothing is too big and nothing is too small. Literally include everything. List any research, professional, or poster presentations that you've ever done in medical school, like at conferences and lectures, symposiums, at your school, like at the local fair, whatever. You want to include the title of your presentation, all the authors, and again, doesn't matter if your publication hasn't been fully accepted or published, you can still document it. So for example, this first one here, it was just a oral presentation that I gave at my medical school, and that counts. It was like a PowerPoint presentation similar to this. And then the second option here, or the second one here, is when I was at the School of Public Health at Brown, I actually was able to be involved in a project that got published, which I was very lucky and fortunate to be involved in. And as you can see here, I'm not the first author, which basically means this person, Dr. Dubling-Kita, is the first author. She was the primary author of this project. This is like her project, but I was like basically an assistant or someone who like helped in some capacity. And so that's why my name's like lower down, but again, still very important to include. And then you also want to just briefly mention any honors or awards that you've received. Mostly during medical school, it's okay to include the ones that you got in high school if they are remarkable. Like if you were like valedictorian or like salutatorian, you know, you can include those things. You should also include any honors that you get during med school. And for me, I was fortunate enough to be awarded a few society awards, and that was important for me to include. And then last but not least, including a personal interest is actually optional for most CVs, but interestingly enough, the ERAS, the application for medical residency, actually requires this. So you can include any languages that you're proficient in. If you're like fluent in Spanish or any other language, you should include it, but only if you're fluent. And then any personal interests that you have. And this is mostly just to start conversation in interviews. It really doesn't offer any benefit outside of that. And last but not least, how do you format it? So you want to make sure that your margins are about more than a half inch. It's usually 0.5 to 1 inch margins. Your font should be 11 or 12, and the most common fonts are Arial, Times New Roman, and Calibri. It shouldn't be any funky, you know, like ancient Arctic type writing. It should be consistent in style, size, and formatting. You want to use different like, you know, bold, italics, capitalization to help organize your CV, because it can get very like messy very fast. And it shouldn't really be that long. I think at your kind of where you are in training, it shouldn't be more than 2 pages. And there are a lot of opportunities to practice CV writing, usually at different med schools. So if you have any questions, you should certainly reach out to your advisor, who can probably help you in formatting yours. If not, or if you want additional resources, you can go to that same website that I just showed you, the AAMC, and go to the CV portion of that website, and it actually shows you samples. It actually gives you like a blank document that you can fill out yourself. So I recommend everyone kind of looking at that. Okay, and before I go on to the interview, which is going to be kind of the last portion of the talk, I don't know if there's any questions that anyone has.
One question. So how early can you ask for letters of recommendation?
Right, that's good. So so it's actually, you have to be very intentional. So for the clinical letters, I went into my rotations knowing I wanted a recommendation. So it's one of those things where you actually have to like go into the rotation being like a superstar. You have to be like a badass, because it's because you're going to ask for a recommendation. So for me, obviously I applied into internal medicine. And so for my internal medicine rotation, it was very important that I impressed the attending or the physician. I'm not sure the term that you guys use, but that you work with. It was very important that I impress that person, because that was a person that would have to write my recommendation, because I was going in internal medicine. So at the start of the rotation, I was upfront and honest, and I was like, I'm going in internal medicine. I would love to get a recommendation from you at the end of this, just as a heads up, but we can talk about it a little bit later. So I would say at the start of like your more of like on the clinical side, like your core clerkships. And for your research, for researchers, really, you should just really ask, I think for everyone else, like your research mentors or any other clinical mentors or like your dean, you should probably ask, like, I want to say 2 months, 2-3 months before your, the deadline to submit applications. So to give them some time. Any other questions?
Nope, that's like it. Thank you for answering that.
So we'll move on to kind of the last.
I have one question.
Yeah, of course.
Is my letter of recommendation? It is like it is valid from if I get from a Jamaican consultant other than the US.
I'm sorry, it was a little bit choppy. Can you repeat that?
Just
Or maybe you can type it in the chat, because I think your connection's a little bit weak.
Actually, he's asking that if we can get a letter of recommendations from the Jamaican doctors, is it valid? They accept?
Right, that's actually a great question. So I'm gonna be honest with you. I think it's probably gonna be more beneficial to try to get as many letters of recs from US physicians. But I think if you were to get, and I think it should be a mix. So I encourage everyone if you're going to apply to any U.S. medical residencies, you should try to find opportunities within the United States, whether that be finding a research mentor or coming here to literally any hospital and doing like a rotation or like some research opportunity. I think it would be important to get at least 1 or 2 recommendations from here, and then I think you can get like a very strong recommendation from someone that you worked with in Jamaica, like someone that you work with clinically on rotations who is going to speak so highly of you. And I will say, unfortunately, people here value like rank. So like, let's say you worked with the head of this med school, or like you worked with the director of the internal medicine department in Jamaica, that will carry a lot of weight. So if I were you, I would do a mix of the two. I don't think you should get all recommendations from Jamaican physicians, but I wouldn't suggest you get all from the US either, because they may not be as strong. So I would definitely do both.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, so the interview, so I think this is like one of the best parts of the application process, because it's like finally an opportunity to like meet your potential residency employers, your potential co-residents, and learn more about a program that you're particularly interested in. The interview is not only for them to get to know you, but very much for you to get to know them as well. And it really is an opportunity for you to show your personality and to showcase your interests, especially if you feel like your application isn't the strongest. I think sometimes the interview, if it's very strong, that can be the make or break. And so let's talk about what exactly to expect with the interview. So I have like a 10 tips list for conducting a successful interview. So number one is practice, practice, practice. So you should be practicing before each interview questions and answers. Like you should find someone who you truly trust. It can be a family member, it can be one of your peers at the med school, and basically just asking like 5 questions and you practicing your response, because they really want you to show them that you are coherent and that you have like a good story, and that you're very motivated and interested in their program. So I recommend practicing before every single interview that you do. Research the program in advance. This is very important. Sometimes all the programs can seem the same, but they're like small nuances that make them very different. And they're going to ask you like, why us? Why do you want to come here? And so you better have a good answer. And then also you want to know about their program so you can ask them questions, because at the end of the interview, they're going to be like, do you have any questions for us? And it's going to look bad if you don't. So it's important to do your research. Obviously be on time, be punctual, whether it be in person or virtual. Dress to impress. Make sure you wear formal business attire. Keep a smile on your face, keep good eye contact. And then also watch for body language. Be aware of any, interesting tics that you have, or, you fumble with your fingers or have really bad eye contact. You make sure you work on that prior to your interview. You also want to avoid filler words as much as possible. Again, that will get much better once you practice. Know your application inside and out. Literally, during my interview, I remember someone asking me about a research thing that I did like many moons ago that wasn't really something that I was particularly interested in that like recent time or that recent year. And so, but they still wanted to hear about it. So it's really important for you to be well-versed in your own application, because they will literally go in the weeds and ask you all kinds of things. And also don't put anything in the application that you aren't like proud of, or that won't like advance you in your career. Be prepared to explain any areas of weakness or gaps in your record. So if you had to take a leave of absence, or if you if you had to do a year over, or it took you an additional year to complete training, be able to explain that. It's okay, things happen, but it's important that you're able to communicate that clearly. Send thank you notes, emails within a few days of the interview. Some programs actually don't want you to communicate afterwards. So it's important to kind of clarify on your interview day if it's okay, or if it would be acceptable to communicate after your interview. And lastly, keep an open line of communication post-interview. So for example, I had so many questions after my interview throughout the interview trail, in which I emailed a lot of the residents I had met. So it's really important to make sure you have people's like contact information. You can like shoot them a quick like email just to ask clarifying questions. And especially when you want to compare different programs. So what are the common interview questions? So almost everyone is going to ask you, or basically start off and say, tell me about yourself. You're like, that is the broadest, most general statement. But it basically is an opportunity for you to take the floor, and you can lead the discussion in any way that you want. You can, say, I'm from Jamaica. My parents are, XYZ. I was able to go to this high school, this med school. These are the things that I was able to do in med school. My interests include this, this, and this. So, tell me about yourself it's very broad. And almost everyone will ask you this question. Other common questions include, why are you interested in this particular specialty? So, why GI? Why internal medicine? And usually you want to bring it back to a personal story or patient encounter that you had, or research opportunity that you had that made you realize, you had that aha moment, this is the specialty that I want to go into. And then they're going to ask you, why this program? Why us? And this is why it's important to do your research. I want to go to your program because you have this excellent researcher on faculty who I want to work with, or I want to go to your program because it seems very collegial. I chose the Brigham for residency because it was like the warmest program that I heard about in the interview trail. Like, I've had a few people who went there 1 or 2 years ahead of me, and they loved it. They said the people there were just wonderful. They were nice. They were easy to work with. So that was very important to me. It also was very strong in GI. So these are things that I looked into. They're going to ask you, tell us about your research. Tell us about your extracurriculars. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Describe a difficult experience in your life. How did you handle it? Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? This is actually a very common one. Especially when you embark on residency and fellowship. Tell us about a patient experience that has impacted you. And what are your interests outside of medicine? This is also a very common one. Make sure that you've cultivated some interests outside of schoolwork. Again, makes you a well-rounded individual. And then sometimes they'll say, why should we choose you? What sets you apart from others? What are your biggest assets? And then lastly, they're going to ask if you have any questions for them. So you better have some questions. And then I just wanted to do a quick wrap up. So when it's time to apply, I think on average, if you're applying from like an American accredited medical school, the average list of programs that you apply to is anywhere from 20 to 30. I think, unfortunately, as I'm sure you all know, it's a little bit more difficult for IMGs. And so I think on average, I recommend around 80 to 100 programs for applications, or even more. And it should be a mix of reaches, meaning schools that are like incredible, that are like that you think is like way beyond your reach. For me, applying to the residency that I got into, that was a reach for me. But you never know, you may get lucky. And you want to include a bulk of like within reaches, meaning like you're on par. And then you want to apply to a few safeties. So for you all, that will mean like a lot of community programs. There are a ton of community programs in New York, guys. Like, you guys should all apply to all of the residency programs in New York City. There are like a lot. You want to know your qualifications of all the match and unmatched applicants, and those who kind of match your application. And again, you can go and look at the NRMP website. And look at how many research experiences you have, how many volunteer experiences you have, what's your step 1 score, and see if those people matched or not. So know your risk not matching. If that's a possibility, talk with your advisor and think of like a kind of a game plan in the event that you don't match. Work on your application early, submit your application on the first day it opens, because interviews are on a rolling basis. And you want someone to review your application beforehand. And then last but not least, you have to clean up your social media. I had to put this in because it's 2021 and, you know, we all have Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook. It's really important to actually like go through all of your social media accounts and delete anything that is suspect, concerning, questionable, because they absolutely will Google you. Unfortunately, it's kind of the age of social media. So make sure before your application that you do that. And I just quickly wanted to just put this, a plug, top IMG friendly states and specialties. So again, New York, really good state to apply to. And I guess Florida and Michigan. So I guess those are like the top three. And then for specialties, internal medicine, family medicine, peds, and surgery. Unfortunately, the probability gets a little bit lower once you get into more kind of specialized, like a radiation oncology, unfortunately OB-GYN. Just to think about these things, like, you know, the harder it is to get in, obviously you need to think about that, and you just need to perform stronger, whether that be in your STEP scores or in all the kind of experiences that I've talked about. And that wraps up my presentation. Do you guys have any more questions for me?
Hi, so a few questions from in the chat.
Okay.
So how many programs did you apply for?
I applied to 30. I did like, honestly, I think I did 10 reaches, 10 like on par, and like 10 safeties. I think that was on average. I think most of my friends did like anywhere from like 20 to 30. I think the reason 30 is on the higher end. Honestly, the reason why I did that many was regionally, like geographically, I wasn't sure where I wanted to end up. So I applied like all over. I applied to the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, California. So I was like all over the place. But I think on average, most people from like my program applied to like 20, 25, but I did 30.
All right. How do you explain a weakness that still sounds like a strength?
That's a good question. So you always have to spin it, right? So it's like, oh, so let me give you an example. So you can say my weakness sometimes can be time, like managing my time, because I am so, you know, overcommitted, or I find myself being, you know, very involved in all these extracurriculars. So I am constantly working on trying to manage my time so I can, you know, be efficient and make sure I'm still living like a well-rounded life. So you just kind of want to spin it, right? Like I'm saying my weakness is time management, but I'm also then saying that like I'm very involved. So that's basically what you want to do. You never want to like shoot yourself down too much, but you always want to make it into a positive.
Right, understand. Could you explain what the difference is with community programs?
Sure. So there are two types of programs. There's like academic programs, which is like the program that I'm in, Mount Sinai, and then there are community programs. And basically, academic programs are programs that are geared towards people who may potentially want a career in academics, meaning they want to have research in some capacity once they're like a practicing provider. So, you know, my institution we have like many months dedicated to research. unfortunately, those programs oftentimes are almost exclusively, those positions are almost exclusively given to US applicants. And so by default, unfortunately, I think a lot of IMGs end up at community programs. And so community programs are still very strong, but they are usually smaller, meaning smaller hospitals. You don't see as many sick patients. Sometimes these hospitals don't have like the capacity to take care of really sick patients. So for example, in my hospital, we're able to do advanced procedures, and we're a liver transplant center. A lot of the other community hospitals, the smaller hospitals in the local area don't have the capabilities of transplanting a liver. So they transfer their patients to our hospital. So they're usually smaller, they're very clinical. So it's usually not an expectation to do research, but it's like a lot of patient care. And a lot of IMGs actually end up in that route. I think that a lot of the New York programs here, like 50% or more of their residents are IMGs.
All right. How many interviews did you do?
Oh, I did too many. I think I did 27 out of the 30.
Oh, wow.
wouldn't recommend it, but yeah. So I was lucky enough to get, I actually did get all my interviews, all the programs I applied for, I got interviewed for, except for one or two.
Oh, okay. One more. We have, if I get a weak letter of recommendation from my attending, can I ask that they make revisions? For example, if my attending isn't the best writer.
That's funny. So I actually think, unfortunately, that we can't see them. They're like not allowed to. I guess technically your attending could send you the document like on Word, but there's like a clause or something, I think, in the application that says that they should not be sharing the letters with the applicants, unfortunately. So I would just have an honest conversation with the attending. Make sure that they can write a strong letter. Be like, listen, will you have my back? Can you write a strong letter? It's okay if you can't, I'll move on. And if they say yes, absolutely, then just like, they should make sure that they have other people edit it. Like, it's really important for them to do that. And if you're close with them, it's okay for you to suggest that or recommend that. But unfortunately with ERAS, it's actually frowned down upon for applicants to review the letters beforehand.
Ouch. What are your views on an IMG's chances with the USMLE Step 1 being pass or fail, and the USMLE Step 2 CS being canceled basically from residency applications?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. I'm curious to see what the data is going to show in a couple of years and how it affects, I think, both US applicants and IMGs. I think it's interesting. I would hope that it wouldn't affect you guys negatively, but I do think that because it is Step 1 is pass fail, that it's really, 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 really important to study your butts off for Step 2. I will say that. And I think it's really, really, really important to make sure you do well. I'm assuming you guys, I don't know if you guys have grades. You probably do actually have numeric grades for each class or like core rotation. They're going to look at those two things. They're going to look at your Step 2 and your core rotation. So I would heavily focus on those two things. I think overall it won't affect you guys negatively. But I guess time will tell.
Right. A follow-up question on that. So do they also look at preclinical scores, or are you not sure?
Yes, they do. So whatever is on your transcript, they have access to. So, but it depends on the school. So for Brown, our first 2 years, they were pass fail, which was very lucky. So all they saw on my transcript was a P, and that's all they got. So, but we got graded on our, we took exams after each core elective. So I had an exam in like peds, an exam in internal medicine, an exam in surgery, and they had access to those scores. And my third and fourth year, we had honors. So we had like honors, then pass, then fail. And so that is what they really differentiated between different applicants, like who got honors and who got high scores for the tests. But yeah, they will have access to everything for you guys. And they want to look at all 4 years.
Mhm. Right. Okay, so if I don't have any research experience, how likely is it that I will be accepted for a residency program?
I'm going to say probably unlikely. It's important to, I showed you the numbers. The average was like 4 to 6 for IMGs. And again, it doesn't have to be like, you don't need to be published in like a journal, right? It literally could be, you can like talk to a professor or a physician or someone that you respect, see if they're doing any research, and help them with data collection or help them review something and turn that into a presentation and give that presentation at a conference. That's research. So I advise everyone to do some aspect of research, because I do think, here, if we don't do any research here, there's like the very low chance of getting into a top program. So I can only imagine for IMGs that the likelihood would be even lower. I was gonna say, that being said, it also depends on like the program you're applying to, right? So like applying to an academic hospital, like I mentioned, probably very slim chances. To a community program, probably higher chances of getting in without doing research. But why take the chance? I think if you have the time, try to get something in.
Right. How long is a typical residency in gastroenterology?
It's 3 years. Yeah, it's typical. So I did 3 years of internal medicine and 3 years of GI, and then I'll be done.
Okay. Last question. So based off your previous history, we see that you went to different Ivy Leagues. So someone had asked, how do you go about applying for these prestigious universities?
How do you go about applying? Honestly, all the things that I mentioned, I think setting yourself up with success, for success. I think to be a competitive Ivy League applicant, you have to be extremely well-rounded. You have to have top scores. Like I had above a 240 on my step 1 and 2. I had honors in all my core clerkships, and I had AOA. And AOA is basically if you're top like 1% of your class. So I think that is what kind of sets Ivy from like some top programs. And then I was also very, very, very involved in my medical school. So I think that helped as well. And also like being confident in yourself. I think some people, they're like, oh, I will never get in. Just apply. Like literally the worst that can happen is you spend money and you waste your money on the application and they say no. But you'll never know if you don't apply. What's the saying? The saying is you'll miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So just have confidence in yourself and apply very, 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 very broadly.
Thank you so much for that encouragement.
Someone else messaged me and said, what is the best time to do your step 2? Is it after core rotations or electives? So step one, we took right before we started core rotation. So step one was after, so I'm sure it's very different from your respective med schools, but my med school was a 4-year was 4 years. First 2 years was preclinical, second 2 years was clinical. So step one I took after the first 2 years of preclinical, right before starting core rotations. And then step 2, I took at the end of all my core rotations before electives. So basically before starting 4th year. So at the end of 3rd year, which was all our core, that's when I took it. But I think it varies for each program.
Mahesh, you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Doc, for the wonderful informative session, firstly.
Of course.
And thank you, Atia, for organizing this session. I have a couple of questions. Can I
Sure.
go ahead?
Of course.
So I did my all rotations, like the core rotations and electives here in Jamaica.
Okay.
So, do you recommend me to do any rotations in US before applying for residency?
Yes. I think, I think it may be hard. So I'm going to be, I'm not probably the best person to ask, obviously, because I'm not an IMG, but I will say, even in our system, there are some specialties that highly recommend doing an array rotation, which means like, so for, Brown Med, I did not do this because I was internal medicine, but my friends who did like very unique surgical, wanted to do surgery or OB-GYN, they even did away rotations, meaning they went to another hospital in another state to get that clinical experience because it was highly recommended for their application. So I think for you guys, if you are seriously considering applying to the US, I would recommend looking into opportunities to rotate here. And again, it can be at any hospital. It does not have to, does not have to be a top program. But saying that you were in the United States, you worked at a hospital, and you get like good remarks or a good recommendation, I think will go far and speak highly to your application. So I would strongly recommend that.
So how many rotations is better to do?
I think at least one. I mean, it's all about what you're capable of doing, one or two. It may not even be the how many, but like the quality of it, right? Like, can you spend 2 to 4 weeks in the same place? I'd rather you get like a good 3 weeks in or 4 weeks at one location than like 1 week at like 4 different locations.
Okay.
I don't think there's like a set number, but I would definitely recommend at least one.
Okay, thank you. And how long? What's the time period between step 2 application and residency is valid? Like, so do you suggest any time period that we should apply residency within after doing step 2?
Yes. I'm trying to remember all my the timeline. I feel so old. Yeah, I think I took step 2. I took step 2 April of my, it was like the tail end of my 3rd year, right? So 3rd year. So April was like literally the last month of my 3rd year. And then we started applying for residency my 4th year, and applications were due that July. I think they were, if I'm remembering correctly, I think they were due like July 1st. And this might have all changed since then, but so yeah, I took step 2, what's that, May, June, July. I took step 2 to 3 months before I submitted my application.
Okay, if it is more than 1 year, is it still chances of getting into residency?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you,
that's
Doc.
fine. Yeah, there's no, if you take it 1 year before, that's totally fine.
Okay. Does it affect like if you take more years between residency and step 2? You're matching into the program.
The more you like, if you take step 2 and you wait like 3 years to apply.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there probably doesn't look great, but I mean,
Okay.
you can explain everything, right? Like something happened, or if you were doing research,
Okay.
that should be fine. But I think 1 year is fine. You know, I think 3 or more may be like weird. But I mean, these are questions maybe to ask the advisor too, because there may be ways around it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Doc.
Yes, of course.
One more question. So what about step 3 in the
Oh,
chart?
step 3, don't worry about step 3. Don't worry about step 3. Step 3 is not, it's not. Step 3 is not real. No. You take step 3 in residency. And I took mine you have to take it at some point in time during residency. I took mine, I think my 2nd year of residency. And honestly, you just have to pass. No one really cares. I don't even know if they even looked at my step 3 when I was applying to fellowship, to be honest with you. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. For you guys, I would focus obviously on passing step 1 and then really getting a good score on your step 2.
Okay, thank you so much. If that's all of the questions, then I think we're wrapped up for the evening. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Winter, for your time. We really appreciated all of the tips, and I will be distributing a Google Drive link with the PowerPoint and some of the other resources that she mentioned throughout the presentation.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you guys for listening. And Atia, I'll give you my, my email, but you should just give everyone my email in case they have any questions after.
Right. All right, thank you, members of SCORE and SCOME, for coming out. We really appreciate you guys as well.
Good luck to everyone. You all are going to do so well in your medical journeys. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. And so I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.